these 3 recipes all use the Instant Pot. They're really easy to put together and really delicious. I'm so excited to use my Instant Pot more this year. I feel like I use it just for a couple of things, and that's really all. So I'm excited to be using it a bit more. So today I'm going to be sharing a few different recipes, and I'm just really excited to take you along. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and prep veggies for dinner, which is going to be a wild rice and mushroom soup. I love this recipe. So I have mushrooms, onion, and carrots. I'm going to go ahead and slice up the mushrooms, chop up the onions, and wash and peel and chop up the carrots. I love mushrooms, but if you don't, you could just leave out the mushrooms if you want, and maybe at the end add in some peas or asparagus. I do think those would be really good with this recipe. Now it's time to cook everything in the Instant Pot. So I put in some butter. Once that melted, I added in all those veggies that I just chopped up. And I just wanted the veggies to be cooked. So I sauteed them for maybe like 10 minutes. Really, I just wanted to make sure the carrots were fork tender, since that would take the longest. And once they were, I added in the rice. So this was all 100% wild rice. The recipe did note you don't want to find like mixed wild rice, so wild rice with other rice. You just want all wild rice. It was a little hard to find, but I did find it. I also added in some water. Broth would have been better, but I didn't have broth. So instead I added poultry seasoning. I thought it would give it kind of a similar flavor, maybe some of those flavors that's missing without the broth. And then I seasoned it with garlic, salt, parsley, and oregano. I will leave the original recipe linked below, but of course I made some changes, so I'll leave the changes that I made in the description. I kept it simpler than the original recipe did, but all I did was cook it on high pressure for 45 minutes, and then I released the pressure. Right before the 45-minute mark, I went ahead and made kind of like a creamy thickener for the soup. So you can either do like a cream or you can do kind of a butter, flour, and milk mixture. So I took a shortcut. Instead of cooking on the stove and dirtying a pan, I just did it in the microwave. So you just have to make sure your flour gets hot enough. So I cooked the flour. I actually remade it after I recorded it, but I cooked the flour for a couple minutes in the microwave. Then I put the butter in to melt it, so it cooked for a few minutes in the microwave. And then I put it in the milk, put it in the soup, and it did a great job of thickening it up. I thought it worked really well in the microwave, but you could definitely just use a pan on the stove. So I just wanted the soup to be a thicker texture. You know, it's a creamy wild rice and mushroom soup. I did go ahead and try it, and I decided it needed some more flavor. And so I added extra onion salt, which isn't in the recipe, but I think it adds a really nice kind of oniony, salty flavor. And so I added that. I also added additional salt and pepper and oregano. So you could do this to your own taste, but I just wanted it to be more seasoned, and also I didn't use any broth, which reduced the flavor. But I love this soup. It's creamy, it's hearty. I'm just about to get started making dinner. Here are all of the ingredients except for parmesan to finish and then ground beef. But I have carrots. My store only had like multicolored carrots. That's what I got. Garlic. My brother actually grew this in his garden, which is pretty cool. Onion. This is half and half. You could use like heavy cream. Calls for white wine. I just bought this white cooking wine. I have Italian seasoning, salt, pepper. I don't have fennel, tortellini. I like our soup to be a bit less soupy and kind of thicker. So I don't think I have all of the like broth or the liquid ingredients that the recipe calls for. I'm making some changes. I'll leave the changes I make below, but I have some broth. I'm using this tomato puree instead of like tomato sauce. I saw this at the store. I thought it was interesting. It's like tomato paste in a jar. So I thought that was nice. I made a recipe with this last week. some flour. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to chop up the veggies first. It also calls for celery. I just don't have celery, so I'm not going to use that, but let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clean the carrots, peel them, and chop the veggies. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and cook up the meat. I'm using the Instant Pot. I figure the Instant Pot is nice. You can saute, and I could do a slow cooker function since we're not going to eat for a few more hours. So I'm going to cook up the meat a little bit here first. The meat is definitely not cooked, but I do want to go ahead and saute some of these veggies. So I'm going to drop in the carrots that I chopped up and the onions that I diced. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in the seasonings. So I'm doing a teaspoon of Italian seasoning. A teaspoon is a light teaspoon of basil. This is salt. I think I'll do about 3/4 of a teaspoon. And I'm going to put some pepper in there. And the meat is all cooked right now. So I'm just going to give this a stir. And then I'm going to add in the tomato paste next so that can kind of start to caramelize a little bit. I think that adds a great tomato flavor if you caramelize it a little bit. And I'm going to use the rest of this jar, so it's about 5 ounces. As I'm adding the tomato paste, I do want to say that besides for cooking the ground beef, before adding the rest of the ingredients, it's also important to make sure the carrot is cooked because that does take the longest. That's why I cut it in small pieces, and I just wanted to ensure it was soft. And I just want to cook this until it starts to darken in color. So just get a deeper red, and that should deepen that tomato flavor. At this point, I'm also going to go ahead and grate in that garlic. I didn't want it to burn, so I didn't want to do it any earlier than this, but I'm using 3 massive cloves of garlic. Grate this up. I just added the garlic. I don't know if you can tell, but it's definitely a deeper red color, and there's bits starting to get stuck to the bottom. So I think that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and cook this for another like 30 seconds so the garlic gets a little bit more cooked, and then I'm going to add in the liquid. So now I'm going to deglaze the pan. I'm going to be using this cooking wine, so 1/2 cup of it. I'm going to let this deglaze the pan. I'm going to let this just kind of cook off a little bit. And then I'm going to add in broth. You could use beef broth. I think that'd be really good. Vegetable broth. I have chicken broth, so that's what I'm using. And if you like a thinner soup, you could add double the broth. I just want a very thick soup. And I might have to add a little bit of water before I add the pasta, but I'll do that at that time. So I'm adding 4 cups of broth. I'm also going to go ahead and add in this entire jar of passata. It's tomato puree. It just has salt and tomatoes. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. This is 24.5 ounces. I added in a couple tablespoons of water just so I could get most of that tomato puree out. At this point, I have all of the ingredients that I want to cook slowly on the slow cook function. I'm going to add some heavy cream, the pasta, and some parmesan when it gets closer to eating time. So here's what it looks now. It smells delicious. I'm excited about it. I bought this lid off of Amazon. I've heard great things about it. It's supposed to be like a slow cooker lid, whereas the regular Instant Pot lid isn't a very good slow cooker lid, I've heard. I've never tried this before, but I'm gonna slow cook this for 2 hours, and I'll add in the pasta, and once that's done, I'll add in the cream, but I'll show you as I add everything else. It's getting close to dinner time now, so I'm gonna go ahead and add in the pasta. So we're doing a whole pound of orzo. I do like it thicker, so if you want it to be a thinner soup, you could also add less pasta, maybe about a 1/2 pound. But I went ahead, kept it on the slow cooker function, and cooked it for 20 minutes, checked it. The noodles weren't quite cooked, so I did it for 10 more minutes, so 30 minutes total. And at that point, the pasta was cooked. So then I took the lid off, put in some of the cream, about a 1/2 cup, and added in a half cup to 1 cup of Parmesan. I added in a cup, but you could do a half cup, and it made it creamy and cheesy. This soup was really, really good. It was hearty, full of flavor. It tasted a little garlicky, tomatoey, cheesy and creamy. And I loved how I could saute it and slow cook it in the same pot. Moving on to the next recipe, I'm doing beef stroganoff, again in the Instant Pot. It's another new recipe to me, and I'm excited to share it with you. So I am just in the Instant Pot putting in some butter, putting in mushrooms. I just did a whole package and I washed and sliced them. I seasoned it with garlic powder and oregano, and I just cooked that for a few minutes. And I added in a couple tablespoons of flour, and I started to ensure that the flour was coating the mushrooms. So at this point, I added in the liquid. I used beef broth for this. I'm sure you could use vegetable broth or chicken broth too if that's what you have. But I also added in tamari, and the recipe calls for Worcestershire. I used tamari in replacement of that or soy sauce. It just adds a really nice umami kind of deep flavor. I added in meat, and I did 1 pound of cut up beef, but you could use 2 pounds of what the recipe called for. But I thought 1 pound worked out really well. So I cooked it on high pressure for 15 minutes, and then I did a manual release. And at this point, I wanted to go ahead and take the meat out so I could cut it in smaller pieces. So I did that, put it back in the pot, and then I added in the egg noodles. So at first, I wasn't quite sure if the egg noodles would cook properly since they weren't covered in the liquid, but I decided to just go for it, give it a try. I did try and stir it so that, it got a little bit wet. The egg noodles got a little bit wet, but I just went for it and it worked really well. I thought it turned out great. So while the noodles were finishing cooking, I went ahead and did cornstarch and water just so that I can thicken it up a little bit. So a couple tablespoons of cornstarch, cold water. At this point, the egg noodles are cooked. So I went ahead and added in that cornstarch and water mixture, and then I just sauteed it. So I just put on the saute pressure or saute function, and I just wanted to make sure that cornstarch was cooked. So I let it come to like a simmer until it got really hot. And then I added in some sour cream to add some creaminess to this, and I thought it turned out great. It was really easy, not a lot of ingredients, and it's not really something I make often because it seems really complex. And this recipe was not. It was full of flavor, the meat was tender, and we all really liked it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed these recipes, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.